Hi, my name is Lucy Lynn. I'm the founder of Forestlyn. Today we're doing an educational series about emerging technology for beginners. I have a very exciting guest with me today. Her name is Caroline Malcolm. She heads up the Blockchain Policy Centre at the OECD. So she talks to she's a global reference point for blockchain policymakers around the world. So that's very exciting. You're very important, Caroline. Love to hear more about what you do and also to go through a little bit more about blockchain and to decipher international blockchain policy as well. So my first question to you, Caroline, when you were younger, what did you want to be and what did you study at school?
I actually first started wanting to be an astronaut, like many young children, and then as I got a little older, I started thinking more seriously about the law. And that's actually what I went on to study at university in Sydney. At the University of Technology, I studied a combined degree in law and communications.
So an astronaut to a lawyer, that's very different.
That's something I didn't really work out with physics, so this was the next best.
Okay, got it. Science got me as well. And so after you finished university, after you did your law degree, what did you do? Can you give a brief summary about how you got to where you are in international policy and blockchain?
Sure. So once I finished university, to complete my law studies, I started working with the Australian government solicitor and sort of fell into the tax area, to be honest. But quickly fell in love with tax, and within a couple of months I had started a Masters of International Tax Law at the University of Sydney, and then from there spent the next 4 or 5 years working with the Australian government solicitor and the Australian Taxation Office on both litigation and advice on a fairly wide variety of tax issues. And it was during that time I really got my first exposure to the OECD.
So we were talking about this before, OECD, it sounds like it's an exciting acronym, but can you tell us a little bit more about what the OECD's purpose is and what it actually does?
Sure. So the OECD is the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. We have 36 member countries. Australia is one of those. So like-minded countries working together on policy development, and we also set international standards in areas like tax, and now starting to work in the area of blockchain as well.
Okay, so it develops standards for global regulations?
Yes.
Okay. So this is where your law degree comes in and your tax experience.
That's right.
Okay, and so tell us a little bit more about what you're doing. So you're heading up the blockchain centre for OECD. What does that involve? And
so the Blockchain Policy Centre really arose out of a project that the OECD had called Going Digital, which was a 2-year project looking at the impacts of digitalisation across a huge range of policy areas. And getting to that end of that 2-year project, talking with our members about where they wanted to focus their attentions next, they really identified 2 emerging technologies which they thought were really going to be quite critical to future policy development. And one of those was artificial intelligence, and the other is blockchain. And it was really out of that discussion that we agreed to build a blockchain policy centre. It's really a way of bringing together the different areas of blockchain work at the OECD, because we've actually been working in this space for about 5 years now, but fairly disparate strands of work. So this was a chance to really make sure that those strands came together more coherently, but also making sure that we were looking at the full picture rather than just individual parts.
Okay, very interesting. And how did you decide that these are the 2 type of technologies? Because emerging technology, there's so many different types. But how did you settle on AI and blockchain? I think both these emerging technologies are very popular at the moment. Yeah. Is that one of the reasons? But what were the reasons behind that driver?
Yeah, look, there was obviously a lot of technologies being considered undergoing digital, but these are really the 2 which our members thought were likely to have the most impact going forward. And obviously they have a lot of impact individually, but we think there's probably also use cases where we'll see AI and blockchain intersect.
So just talking about some of this, so can you tell us a little bit more about the problems in terms of that you've seen, and what problems are you looking to solve with AI and blockchain?
So I guess focusing specifically on the blockchain space, We obviously see one of the very first adoptions and applications of blockchain technology is in the financial services space, and obviously the rise of cryptocurrency, which really was with Bitcoin in 2008, the first application that we saw. Since then, we've seen a lot more use cases develop with respect to payments, for example, or trade finance. Huge number of opportunities in the financial services space. But it's not just limited to that. So we also do work, whether it be in relation to trade and agricultural, for instance, money laundering through the Financial Action Task Force, which is housed at the OECD, issues of corporate governance and capital markets, tax also as well, so using some of my past experience for that as well. And so there's a huge range of policy areas. So really what we're looking to identify is which are the areas where the implications are really hitting right now and need to be addressed as a priority for governments. And our obviously first concern is making sure that we try and prevent some of the downside risk that you see when you see any new emerging technology. It's not unique to blockchain. And then, of course, is looking at the opportunities for economic growth out of a new technology. So creating the right environment to see this technology really foster and reach its full potential.
Okay, fascinating. And in terms of, like, you were talking about financial payments and financial services as one of the forefront problems. Can you give us some use cases in terms of all projects that you've seen that is working really well at the moment?
Yeah. So obviously a big one is initial coin offerings, and there we're seeing a variety of different things. Some are looking a little bit more like a security, for example. Others are more like a utility token where you're not getting any sort of underlying interest in the entity or issuing body, but there might be a sort of a right to a future service that this company which is offering the token is actually going to develop. And those different things have different policy implications. And I think two big areas which we're seeing straight up is money laundering, as I mentioned, and that's definitely been a focus of the Financial Action Task Force. Secondly, also financial education and consumer protection. But what's also we're seeing is the rise of initial coin offerings to be used particularly for small to medium enterprises as a way of raising capital or simply raising funding. For example, in 2018 we saw that about in terms of the total funds raised through IPOs compared to total funds raised through ICOs, it's about 12% of ICOs compared to the IPO market. So it's small, but it's definitely growing. We've seen huge growth since 2014. And that's something that we're aware of as obviously an interesting new way to, in a sense, formalise, for example, the crowdfunding market. But also there are some risks that we need to make sure are properly taken into account.
Yeah, so for the people who don't really understand initial coin offering, ICOs are a way of crowdfunding money for projects, like blockchain projects. And it's great to hear that there is a global movement in terms of setting policies and regulations around that. I know the Australian government has recently the Treasury anyways, has recently called for the public to put in their response or their opinions about how ICOs should be regulated in Australia. And it's great to hear that the OECD is also setting global policies for that as well. In terms of the ICO model, I think that's also changing quite a bit. How do you and blockchain moves so quickly. How do you actually keep up with everything? Like, by the time I think all this actually happens, there's a new regulation that needs to be in place, and then you're still trying to, create the last one. So how do you, keep up to date with all these new changes?
It's definitely always a struggle for regulators. The market moves very, very quickly, new developments, and also wanting to make sure that when regulators do step in, that they do so appropriately and proportionally. So, we are, I guess there is a certain caution that it's important not to move too quickly, but also recognising that if governments don't move at all, there are risks that you're opening up the community for. So look, in terms of how I actually stay across everything that's happening, it's forums like the ADC forum that we've been here at in Adelaide, which is really, really important in terms of understanding what's happening in the community, because what they do is they bring together, not just policy makers like myself, but also people who are really actually developing products, and that's a very important part of the ecosystem to understand what's going on and really engaging with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of you get a lot of knowledge from all different areas, but I do think the community feedback is also something that's really important. I'm glad to hear regulators are also taking that into account. I'd love to hear about the impact that you think blockchain will actually provide in terms for a better society. You talk a little bit about anti-money laundering and also financial education for the public. So how is blockchain going to make an impact to the community or to society?
Yeah. Look, blockchain is not the solution to everything, and that's something, even as the head of the OECD's Blockchain Policy Centre, very, very clear about, that we want to make sure that their technology is deployed in the right circumstances. It's not just used as a current buzzword to get attention for particular projects. That said, there are some very good uses for blockchain technology, and we're quite excited to explore those, both seeing how they're adopted by industry, but also how the governments can also use them to reach their own policy objectives, so as a tool for governments. In terms of, I guess, the particular issues and use cases that we see kind of coming to the fore. We see, obviously, as I said, financial services, supply chain management is another big one, public administration, so government services, and fourthly, digital identity. That's a really big one, which really cuts across all blockchain projects that we like to see what the implications are for that.
And so just like, can you give us a little bit more example in terms of how digital identity will actually impact or a use case in terms of will impact society?
Yeah. So digital identity using a blockchain has the ability to really allow us to have a much better understanding of how our data is used online and how the value that that data actually represents can be better controlled by the individual user. We're seeing at the moment, as you know, a fairly significant public debate around whether we've gone too far with privacy or moving away from privacy, and whether there needs to be a shift back, and blockchain offers a way of giving all of us a much better idea of understanding how is our data used. So when we do searches online, for example, how is that information being used and being monetized, and just having a clear understanding. At a more simple basic level, we see a lot of initiatives in the e-government space, so health records, driving licenses for at the moment we have lots of disparate databases holding these different pieces of information. Increasing globalized world where you might move around from one country to another quite frequently, having a common database and being able to share that information as you move from place to place offers a lot of utility, I think, for citizens.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I think it starts in one's own nation, but it's good to hear a global organisation like the OECD is actually able to still, be able to set regulations that is good for multinationals, because I've lived in 4 countries, or actually 5 countries myself, and so my information is probably in all these countries. Not that I'm hiding anything or anything, but yeah, I mean, I do see a value in terms of needing to standardize all this information as well.
No, I think that's a very, very big part of it, and it's something where at the OECD we're really at this sort of exploration stage. So first, I think top priority is really capacity building. So helping both our staff at the OECD, but also the governments that we work with, have a better understanding of what the technology can do, what are good use cases for it, and what also are situations where we shouldn't be applying blockchain. Because understanding each of those is actually quite important to knowing, when is this the right tool, and what are the downsides, and what are the opportunities it offers. So capacity building is a big part, that we do in addition to the policy research work.
Okay, very interesting. So I'd love to hear from you in terms of as a beginner audience, in terms of international policy and blockchain. What are some practical tips that people can know about to, in terms of get started?
Look, one of the best sources I have to say in terms of high quality information about this is LinkedIn. People in this ecosystem are really great at sharing information, and LinkedIn is a professional environment where we see a lot of information updates, particularly on what's happening in the regulatory space being shared, and that's a really good excuse me, a really good resource. Things like GitHub, Reddit. Some people also use Twitter. I'm not as au fait, I have to say, with Twitter, but look, there is a lot of great resources online that people can use, and increasing levels of sophistication as their knowledge develops.
Fantastic. So we're going to finish with some quick fire questions, Caroline. So I call them quick, fun, final questions. What is one piece of technology that makes your life easier?
It's a blessing and a curse, but it's my iPhone, I have to say. It's having everything with me all of the time is extremely useful, but I have to be very careful about how often I'm on it, because it's almost addictive.
Yeah, you can set settings in terms of how long you've been on certain applications.
Exactly.
I know on some social
Yes.
media,
No,
I've been on far too
They're
long.
great. They're really very useful, and you can be a bit shocked by your own behaviour. So that's very helpful to have an objective reference point.
Very good. And what is the most innovative thing you've seen or heard that you'd like to have in your life?
Wow. Look, it's probably outside of the blockchain space, but some of the technology that we're seeing around the Internet of Things and robotics is actually really, really exciting. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops in the future. We're probably a little bit further away till we see any mass adoption of that. I think blockchain's a little closer.
Okay, and what kind of robotics would you like to see? a cleaning robotics,
Exactly.
maybe?
Someone to keep the house clean wouldn't be a terrible thing. So.
Very good. And which do you prefer, Siri, Alexa, Google, or Cortana?
Look, to be honest, probably Google. I'm not really, haven't really started using Siri with any kind of frequency yet. So definitely Google on a daily basis.
Yeah, you can go, hey Google, clean up my house. And finally, as a beginner, is there any specific resources that you think is great in terms of start learning about international policy and blockchain? Yeah. Anything on LinkedIn that you go, oh, you should follow?
Yeah.
Maybe the OECD website.
Well, I will mention a couple of things that we developed for exactly this reason, but we do trying to get everyone up to a minimum standard of knowledge in the international policy space. So we developed two particular publications I want to mention. One is the OECD Blockchain Primer, which is a short document just essentially explaining blockchain, but taking it from a perspective of international policy. And secondly is a publication that we released last year in 2018 called Blockchains Unchained, and it looks specifically at the issues of blockchain and its use cases in public administration.
Oh, fascinating. I need to look that up myself and read it. Yeah, is that in publication format?
Yes, all freely available online on the OECD website.
Fantastic. I'm going to have to check that out. So if we want to know more about you, Caroline, what's the best way of getting in contact?
We have a great website for the OECD Blockchain Policy Centre, and also I'm on LinkedIn if anyone wants to reach out. Happy to stay connected.
And she's in Paris, so...
And if you're ever in Paris.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time. Very interesting to hear more about international policy and blockchain. I know you're very busy. She flies everywhere all the time. Quite jet lagged, but you can't even tell. But again, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you very much, and hope your audience was able to take something. And we're always looking for new motivated people to get into international policy in the tech space. So please reach out if this is something which interests you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Caroline.